Throughout this series, we have been looking at the creation-evolution controversy. And we've been examining the claims of evolution, the claims of creation. And we've been looking at the influence that evolution has had on our present society, and even looked at where things are headed as evolution has laid a foundation that is even setting us up for future events as described in the Bible. Now, in this session, and I've prayed about this, I wanted to share with you how creation has affected my life and how the message of creation has been used to impact others. And the reason I've prayed about this is that I'm reluctant, and there's been few times, in fact, what I'm going to share with you today, some of it I've never shared publicly. And I'm reluctant to do so because I don't want to stand at a podium and tell people about the things that have happened if it would draw any attention to myself. Some of the things I'll share with you are in this book. It's my testimony book. It's called Let There Be Light. And I was reluctant about putting this book together as well. But it was after returning from Russia in 1990 that God impressed upon me, put together this story of what God has done in your life to encourage others. Now, first of all, my conversion. I have shared some of these things throughout this series, so I'm only going to deal with a few aspects of what occurred. But you must understand that there was one point in my life where I was a zealous promoter of Darwinian evolution. I grew up at a home where my parents taught me there was a creator, and I believed. But when I went to university, it didn't take long, and I was fully convinced that evolution was true. And that was during the 60s, and when I graduated, I became a zealous promoter of Darwinism through the teaching of biology. There was a number of things which occurred, and I won't go into these details. We've already mentioned some of these in this series. It can be very simple, some of the things that occur. In my case, it was information that was reprogramming my mind, but there was other circumstances as well that were occurring. We lost a child at birth because of a mutation. And God used that. I didn't understand it at the time. As I've said, when I came to Christ, it was simply reading a verse in the Bible that my dad had written. And when I realized who Jesus is and what he's done, I committed my life from that point on to do whatever I could do to serve him. And really, my life has been an adventure. I was reading through the book of Acts when I came across the verse. We've already used it today, verse 8, chapter 1. You shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria to the uttermost parts of the earth. And through that verse, God spoke to my heart. And I didn't understand, but it was something like this. I've called you to tell other people about what I've revealed to you. And I want that to happen, first of all, right where you are, at home. And then it will develop in various places, and even to the uttermost parts of the world. It began at home. When one of my friends called me one day, he just backed over his 2-year-old daughter in her driveway. She was dead. And my wife and I had experienced losing a child. You see, when we came to Christ, the whole community, well, they thought we'd lost touch with reality. I lived in a small town in Western Canada. And when my friend called me, we went in to share with them hope. They weren't Christians. And when I shared with them where I knew their daughter was, and that I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not come to know who Christ is, they said, please don't leave until we have what you have. And so my wife and I were able to pray with them. And they accepted the Lord. And they faced this situation, this very difficult situation at the funeral, and the rest of the community just wondered, like, well, how could they do this? Particularly our friends. And so my friend asked if we could just get the friends together some night and do a Bible study. and tell the rest of them why we could believe and trust in God. And so that's what we did. We gathered one night. There was about 10 couples, and I presented to them reasons why I believed the Bible was true. Evidence for creation. It was by this time that I was starting to gather information together and actually speaking in various places. And so I showed this group, my friends, that you could trust and believe in the Bible. The message was very simple, that there is a creator, there has been a redeemer. And I simply showed them a number of slides, some facts, why I believed the Genesis record was true. There were a number of our friends, both husband and wife, in the next few weeks, came to Christ. It was rather amazing. It kind of turned the town upside down. One of my friends told me later what happened to him. He said he was watching the presentation, and it was this slide, he said, that he couldn't get out of his mind. It was a tree, and it went through more than one layer. And I was sharing that this showed that trees like this are called polystrate fossils, had to have been deposited quickly and catastrophically. And that occurred, according to the Bible, at the time of the Great Flood. And when he went home, he kept thinking about this. If that's true, then the Bible is true. And at the end of the presentation, I'd simply said, not only is there a creator, but the creator is Jesus. And he kept thinking, if that's true, then, well, this thing about Jesus, that must be true. And it was a seed that was planted. And he got down beside his bed one night, and he prayed, God, if you're real, show me. And he didn't know at the same time his wife was doing the same thing. There was about 10 of our friends, that is husband and wife, that came to Christ through creation. And it had quite an impact. And by the way, many of these people are still pillars in the church. Then the next phase was to be able to present this information in other places, particularly in my home province, which is Saskatchewan. There were a number of invitations presenting 4 evenings of the creation topic. And those presentations were recorded and distributed. It was in 1987 I prayed a prayer. It went something like this: God, make me willing to do what you want me to do with the rest of my life. And I suggest to you, don't pray that prayer unless you really mean it. Because so many things occurred that were beyond my control, and it became apparent that somehow God was calling me into a full-time ministry. And the next year, 1988, we moved to Southern California by invitation, where I was on staff at Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa up until December of 1990. And it was at that time we felt led to found an organization called Understand the Times, which was a ministry, missionary-minded ministry, nonprofit organization to take the message that God had given me to people in other places, particularly to people in places that had never heard. And it was in 1988 that I made a missionary trip to South America, and when I came back, whenever I would go to tell people, I'd just break down and cry. And I knew that this is what I was to do, but I didn't know how. Well, it has been quite interesting since 1990, as so many doors have opened for creation evangelism around the world. The different opportunities that we've had. For example, to speak to a group, the Institute for Science and Atheism. That was also in 1991. And here was a group of individuals, well, at that time, as you can understand, hardly any of them had ever even heard of the concept of creation. And when we made this presentation, and presentations to other places, I was amazed because there was no criticism, really. People were really very interested. And many of them said, well, we recognize that Marxism was the wrong way, and we know that Darwinism and Marxism were connected, so we're very open to hearing an alternative. It was in 1992 that I was introduced to the Russian Department of Education. These camps, like this one here, the Black Sea, Orlonik, was a camp set up by Khrushchev in the 60s for communist elite to send their children to. But now you see these doors were open to go and to be able to present to students who came from all over Russia a biblical worldview and evidence for creation in a place where once, of course, communism ruled. There's been opportunities to give lectures to groups of scientists for the Department of Education as they have asked us to help them to formulate some materials to present an alternative to evolution. Symposiums on creation, lectures for children and parents and grandparents, and lectures at universities, and lectures for senior citizens all over Russia, and teachers' conferences. And there's been this distribution that has taken place of books and videos that were translated into Russian. And everywhere that we have gone, the response has been overwhelming. People are so hungry. The children and the adults, the teachers, when God's grace is unveiled. Now again, I tell you this because I want to encourage you. Because I think that every one of you can do what I do in whatever scale God calls you to. Think of the people you know, friends and relatives, acquaintances. And they're on the road of life, and everything is just fine. And everything is okay. And suddenly death intervenes. And if they don't know the truth, if they don't know Jesus, if they don't know that Jesus is the only way, they will spend eternity in hell. You see, that's how quick it can happen. It was just 3 years ago, I received a call one Sunday. My son was killed in a car accident in Canada. See, it can happen just like that. But God has given me, well, it was a difficult time. I went through several months. I didn't know how I could even face people, let alone be in ministry. But what I know is the most important is to be able to share with others the truth. And it won't be long where I'll be together with my son. It's important to share the truth with others. Not that we are responsible if they go to hell, but God uses human vessels. You can't have a moderate Christian message. It's the truth, and people's eternity depend on whether or not they believe it. And that's all we can do. There are conditions that are beyond us that require the Holy Spirit. Just as the farmer depends on rain from above, so too when we plant seeds, that's all we can do. And the rest is up to the Lord. But what we can do is plant seeds. In conclusion, you, me, we can be witnesses. The real question is, will we do so? The evidence for creation, which supports this book, is so overwhelming that when one rejects the evidence, one's without excuse. But when one sees the evidence that there is for creation, that points to the reality there is a creator. And as Paul tells us in Colossians, the creator, the one who made everything, is also the one who redeemed us from our sins. Creation is absolutely foundational to the Christian faith, and creation is the truth.